How you doing this morning?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, glad to be able to catch up with you again. Hey, Doc, we've had some conversation about the quarterback at Alabama, and what I want to talk to kind of get your thoughts on. I have a scripture I want to read to you, and then ask you about us as fans and as observers if we're doing this. As Matthew 9:16 says, "No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will always pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wines into new wineskins, and both are preserved." When I look at that passage of scripture, people are saying, where is he going with that? I look at Alabama's dual threat quarterback and dual threat quarterbacks around the nation. How hard do you think it is for fans who have had a traditional quarterback and are making a transition, much like Alabama is this year, specifically Alabama this year, I think has been the one of the biggest changes. How hard is it for them to not keep putting that new quarterback into the old way of measuring success? And that not just in terms of football, but in other things as well.
Yeah, well, it's human nature to try to conceptualize what we're doing now into something that we've done in the past. Because any kind of novel experience, new experience creates the discomfort. It may be exciting, but it's going to create some sort of discomfort because we kind of don't know how to store it. We don't know how to process it psychologically. And so we try to make it fit to something that we've done in the past. Well, the better thing to do is to, instead of falling into that trap, is to just appreciate what you have now and learn from what you're seeing. And so what you have now is a young quarterback who plays the game with a lot of passion and a lot of excitement. He manages his team and is a tremendous leader. He has a different set of skills, and that different set of skills has obviously caused problems for the opponent. So instead of thinking, well, it's not the way we've always done it, or it's something unique and different, there comes with it some different challenges, all right? But those challenges, particularly with being a true freshman quarterback, have demonstrated continually success and the ability to execute an offense that's been built around him. While you look at that and go, well, it's not the way we've always done it, well, you know what? We don't need to do it the way we've always done it, because if we do it the way we always have done it, we're going to kind of lead for people to have the same experience they've always had. Let's try something novel and new.
Speaking with Dr. Bhrett McCabe of the Mind Side. Okay, so now we recognize, okay, this is different. How do we, as the people, there's another passage that says, talks about renewing your mind, and I know part of what drives you to do what you do is about that mind being made new. How do we as fans and all that, you said we need to appreciate that. How do we make that transition from filtering what we're seeing through what we've experienced so that we can get to the point where we can embrace and enjoy what we're getting to experience?
I had a long conversation with a client yesterday about breaking old habits. And I said, you don't really break habits. What you do is you create new habits. You don't unlearn anything. You learn new things. And then what happens is over time, the new patterns, the new learnings take over. That's all that we're talking about here. And so it's going to be funny to come back and listen in 5 years and people, comparing the way quarterbacks play to the way that this young quarterback plays now. He'll be the standard. Okay. So yeah. It's about establishing new patterns and learning those new patterns. A couple of years ago, my wife and I, we had gone back to the same vacation spot, and we found ourselves eating at the same restaurants because we really enjoyed it the first time. And we were in Vegas for a conference, and we kept eating at the exact same spots, right?
Right.
And I turned to my wife and I said, there's thousands of unbelievable restaurants. Why do we want to keep eating at the exact same spots? And we laughed because they were good. They weren't as good as the first time, because the first time was incredible. But what we found was there was comfort in knowing, and we wanted to recreate the excitement that we had a year and a half ago.
Right.
Versus going, you know what, this is kind of novel. Well, when we went into those restaurants the first time, we didn't go in there trying to recreate something we'd done in the past. We went in there with the novel authenticity of that moment. And we need to live with that. And, look, we're going to make decisions and we're going to do things. We're going to go to the games. We know that freshman quarterbacks who have different styles at some point will struggle. And when they do struggle, what skill sets do they demonstrate that allows them to overcome it? Well, I think we saw it this weekend.
Absolutely, and that's my thing is ultimately we've looked in the past in Alabama against LSU and against Tennessee in the last 3 years have had the quarterback had made a play. Just this guy made the play a different way with his legs versus his arms. When we talk about playing at an extremely high level, I love to hear the different types of motivational things that Coach Saban says, or the statements he says to get the team motivated. He made the statement that he has a bunch of hateful guys. He talked about LeBron James and what would happen if we all played that way. When you look at what Alabama was able to do, this time of the year is about fundamentals and being able to do things right. But emotion also plays a huge factor in the game. How is it that some teams are able to come out with those emotional highs and then and seem to contain or control that for the entirety of the game, while others have these huge spikes maybe at the beginning of the game or at some point in the game, but they're not able to maintain it? What makes what's the mental makeup of a team that's able to do it versus a team that can't?
Yeah, it's discipline. It's discipline to a process, and it's belief in knowing that your process will put you in the position to help you win. And so what happens is a lot of times teams use emotion to overcome deficits. They might, and that's why underdogs do well. They may have a lineup or a strategic deficiency. They may not have the skill sets that they're playing against the other team, but they can will it through, right? It's the superhuman emotion of being up against the wall in the fight or flight response where, a mom can lift a car to get it off her toddler. Athletes try to summon that in the big moment, but it's the best athletes, okay? It's the athletes that are the most disciplined, the way they've trained, that don't need the major swings because they're already training with the ideal that their training is at an elite level. It's like my buddy, I think we've said it before, my buddy who's a Navy SEAL says, you don't rise up to the moment, you fall to the lowest level of your training. And that's true. So if your training is elite, why do you need any kind of bump? Why do you need any kind of pump up? It's already there. We are already training to be perfect. We're already training to be elite and dominating. And if our practices are dominating and there's a mindset of excellence in everything that we do, from the way we walk out on the field, that's how we were at LSU. I mean, our coach believed that every experience that the fan had when they came to a college baseball fan needed to reflect the preparation of our team, from the way the popcorn was served to the way the Cokes were cold to the way the stadium was clean. The stadium had to have a look so that when the players got off the bus, every experience they had when they saw us was excellent. Now, he didn't care about, it was funny, I went to a conference with him one day, and I was speaking to, I think it was the Alabama High School Baseball Coaches Association, and he asked a question. He said, "Coaches, how many of you teach a player running through first base after a ground ball, breaking down and looking over to the right to see if the ball was overthrown so you can make it to second?" Every coach raised their hand, and he said, "Let me ask you this. How many of you won a baseball game teaching that?" Nobody raised their hand, and he goes, "You know why? Because I teach my guys to hit 3-run home runs." And he said, I teach that once or twice, and I demand that they know it, but I don't keep teaching that. I teach them on the things that differentiates winners and losers. That's what great coaches do. Most coaches do it because they feel like they need to do it. Great coaches do it because that's the way to win.
Speaking with Dr. Bhrett McCabe of the Mind Side. Doc, speaking of that, we heard Coach Orgeron after his press conference. He really didn't he talked about execution on LSU's part and the Alabama stations, and ours included, really gave him a hard time because he didn't give Alabama credit for his poor execution, okay? He made it sound like it was all about LSU. However, the same Alabama fans that gave him a hard time have looked at what Alabama's defense did to Leonard Fournette and said it was Alabama's great defense. But when they look at the struggles of Jalen Hurts, they've not given LSU's defense credit for that. Why is it as fans that it's so hard for us to truly look at the situation and give credit where credit is due?
Because it really doesn't matter. I mean, what's being said behind the doors. I mean, you can't control what your opponent does. You can try to influence it, but all you can do is try to, try to control what you can control. So, the truth was Saturday night, there were two elite defenses playing with the absolute heart out.
Yeah.
LSU has struggled for the last couple of years with offense. It was the last bite of a regime that really didn't put a lot of premium on having an offensive system. And when you go against a team where talent's pretty much equal, there may be some differentiations, but for the most part, LSU's offensive line was not as good as Bama's defensive line. So it didn't matter what Fournette did. Every time he got the ball, he had somebody in his face, or his hole was shut down. So that was where the big differentiation was. From a defense standpoint, you had elite defense. I worked with a player who played on the 9-6 game years ago, and he said ESPN needs to do a 30 for 30 on that game because there are more players from that one game in the NFL than have played in any college football game. And that was a slobber knocker. And he said, those are two teams that were executing at a high level that were making it impossible for offenses to move the ball. And that's what I think we saw on Saturday night. The difference was a special player and a special unit of the offense of Alabama made a great play and started establishing dominance. And that's where the deficiency was. And it came, whether it's execution or talent, there was a differentiation that happened there. It'll be interesting to see, how that continues because, if you look at it, if you look at it over time with new coaching staff at Baton Rouge, you're going to see probably a staff that continues to tighten up some of the inefficiencies. And that's why people love that game. That's why the United States is mesmerized watching it. It's an elite field of players playing at their best.
Speaking with Dr. Bhrett McCabe of the Mindsight, want to quickly move to just a high school question for you, Coach. It is now winter. Take all, win or go home for the young men that's playing this game we love to call football. What advice would you give, or what would you say to the parents and the coaches and the players that are preparing in just a couple days to potentially run out on that field for the last time? What should they be doing between now and Friday to be prepared for that experience, win or lose?
Don't play for next week. Don't get caught up in what if you don't have a game next week. I did it my senior year. It's what I call Cinderella season, right? Everybody who knows their career is going to end at the termination of the season tries to make it the perfect bow, put the perfect bow on it. And so what happens is they start to play trying to create the perfect scenario. Don't do that because that's a risk, and that's a trap that you get into, and it happens to every senior athlete. Instead, play your heart out, and then if they allow you to play next week, do it again. And if they allow you to play next week, do it again. But don't try to put the perfect scenario and the perfect end on it. Because if you do that, you find yourself playing kind of preventative and playing somewhat fearful, trying to put the perfect ending. There is no perfect ending. All there is a perfect mindset to be competitive in the moment.
That is Dr. Bhrett McCabe of the Mindsight. The Mindsight Manifesto, the urgency to create a competitive mindset, book written by Dr. Bhrett McCabe, being released in January 2017. First 500 copies will be signed. Personal message from Dr. Bhrett McCabe himself. You can go to themindsight.com and order yours right now. Doctor, as we wrap up this segment, I know a lot of times you work with some really elite athletes at the highest level of various sports, football, basketball, tennis, etc., golf. But you also work with the high school athletes, and they may think, well, I don't need that. Tell our high school athletes and parents why they should consider connecting with you in the Mindsight.
Yeah, so if you have a child, a high school athlete that is struggling physically, you take them to a strength and conditioning coach and get them stronger. Well, if they're struggling mentally or struggling in their performance, you can do the same thing. You can bring them to us. We can help develop a plan. We have a state-of-the-art assessment that will tell you why they're struggling and the way that their brain functions in a competitive environment. We're the only one in the country besides the developers that have this. We can give you a report that tells you how to function. So if you've had a kid this year who did not play great but has potential and you can't figure out the missing link, we can tell you what that link is and help them understand a plan to get better, particularly in the offseason, or if you're a basketball player moving into the season. If you want to find an edge, that's how you do it. You start focusing on the mind because it all begins there. So let's get the mind right, and then let's also learn the skills that will help you in life. that's what we do at the Mind Side, and we work with athletes across the entire lifespan. We have a great track record, and we love what we do, and we're very honored to have the opportunity to work with